Egberto Willies is asking a really, I think, a really important question over at Daily Kos. He says, how do we avert the inevitable plutocrat-driven civil war? Now, I'm not envisioning a shooting kind of civil war, but I would argue that, and maybe we need to come up with another word for it that, that doesn't imply people going out with guns. But there is a walling off of different parts of America based largely on race, on lifestyle, and by lifestyle I'm not talking about gender identity or anything like that. I'm talking about living rural versus living urban, working in tech versus being a farmer, those kinds of things. So you got race, you've got lifestyle / geography, and what's called politics. And I think that this was really highlighted by the fact that Donald Trump, when he gets to the UK, freaks out and tweets an attack on AT&T, which now owns CNN. And you have to wonder, did he tell his friends, hey, sell your AT&T stock, I'm gonna tank it for you. Or, sell it short, make some money on it. You make money when the stock goes down. Although I don't know if it went down. But the entire market, went down, and then it's up, and then it's down again. I don't know what's going on with the market today. But anyhow, Trump comes into London and immediately tweets out about how upset he is that he can't watch Fox. Fox hasn't broadcast in the United Kingdom for a couple of years because nobody was watching. So why have the expense? I mean, former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd pointed out in a recent newspaper piece that Rupert Murdoch took over so much of the media in Australia that he basically destroyed the politics of that country. Then he moved to the UK and he bought, the Times of London and a whole bunch of tabloids, and he did the same thing to the UK, helping get, right-wing prime ministers elected forever. And then he came to the United States and he did it to us through Fox, the New York Post, and the Wall Street Journal. And, I mean, Fox really stands alone against every other news service in denying climate change, in supporting tax policies that support the billionaires to the exclusion of average people, in supporting deregulation of the poisons that are poured into our air and the poisons that are poured into our water. Fox News supports all these things. And no other media does, because no other media is, billionaire-owned, billionaire-controlled, and programmed specifically in ways that only help very, very wealthy right-wing billionaires and their companies, and the companies that made them rich. And I think that his unwillingness to even watch CNN should tell us everything we need to know about the tragedy of democracy that's being caused by having a 24/7 propaganda channel. So how do we prevent this from tearing our country apart? It's already happening. You got a gaslighting billionaire in the White House, as Egberto Willies points out over Daily Kos. A guy who just delights in lying through his teeth to the American people. Over 10,000 lies since he became president. And, and thousands of lies, obviously, before that, thousands of lies going back to his claiming that Barack Obama, our nation's first black president, couldn't be a legitimate American citizen. His calling in the 90s for the death penalty for the Central Park Five, who had nothing to do with the violent attack on that young woman in the park. It turns out it was, a serial rapist / killer, who, as I recall, was even a white guy. But Donald Trump, bought this ad in the New York Times saying, put him to death, right? And he hasn't retracted it. Egberto Willies, and so, my question for you, and our number is 202-808-9925, do you think that we are heading towards something that resembles a civil war, a tearing apart of families, a tearing apart of the fabric of our country? With or without guns, I think you might be able to argue that actually there's even a gun piece to this that's kind of scary. For the better part of 2 decades, this is David Neward over at Daily Kos. For the better part of 2 decades, Americans have generally ignored their quietly mounting problem of homegrown domestic terrorism committed by far-right white extremists. And he points out that both the numbers and the history demonstrate that officially and in the media, we have underinvested in monitoring and confronting this kind of terrorism. These are the so-called red pill young men. For example, out of Monroe, Washington, and the Snohomish County court system, 20-year-old Dakota Reed, he's a young man, was posting under the nom de plume Rudolf Haas, which is he was the commandant of Auschwitz. And he says, he posts on Facebook, "I'm shooting for 30 Jews. No pun needed, long way away, not long ways away anyways. See you goys." So they arrested him, freed him on $50,000 bond, and he goes back out and he says, "Y'all mind if I go into a random courthouse in the movie Narnia and take my M32 grenade launcher? Coming for my guns, the police is. Booby-trapped with explosives. My front door has been," trying to talk like Yoda. This time the judge set bail of $500,000. You know, in Utah, 27-year-old Christopher Cleary says, you know, basically, I'm still a virgin, and therefore I'm going to, quote, kill as many girls as I see. He worked out a plea bargain. He said he was, quote, involuntarily celibate. In other words, no woman would have sex with him. And so he's going to go out and kill them. I mean, this is insane. And it's growing, and it's growing on social media. And I'm very concerned that this is literally tearing us apart. Heidi Bierich is the director of the Intelligence Project over at the Southern Poverty Law Center. And she says, quote, "There's no way that if someone was connected to Islamic extremism, they would be handled this way. We have two totally separate terrorist, basically legal ways to deal with terrorism in the United States. If they are Muslim terrorists, all American, or if they're foreign terrorists, then we have really strong laws. And I would add to that, if they are black guys that have been labeled terrorists by our government, I mean, going all the way back to I think it was in Philadelphia where they firebombed that house, the Project Move. What was the name of that? In any case, yeah, it's like this is nuts. And so we've got a way for dealing with white supremacist terrorists, which is very different from the way that we deal with Muslim supremacist terrorists. And, as Heidi Bierich of the Southern Poverty Law Center points out, the latter is much more punishing. That is the anti-Muslim terrorists, filled with legal tools that don't exist for domestic terrorism. And she says some of the sentences for domestic terrorists are ridiculously light in comparison to the others. So that's another piece of this. Meanwhile, the thoughts of the Brits. This is the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, in The Guardian on yesterday, as I recall, maybe the day before yesterday. He says, praising the very fine people on both sides when torch-wielding white supremacists and anti-Semites marched through the streets clashing with anti-racist campaigners. Threatening to veto a ban on the use of rape as a weapon of war. Setting an immigration policy that forcefully separates young children from their parents at the border. The deliberate use of xenophobia, racism, and otherness as an electoral tactic. Introducing a travel ban to a number of predominantly Muslim countries. Lying deliberately and repeatedly to the public. No, writes the mayor of London, these are not the actions of European dictators in the 30s, nor military juntas of the 70s. I'm not talking about Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong-un. These are the actions of the leader of our closest ally, the President of the United States. This is a man who tried to exploit Londoners' fears following a horrific terrorist attack on our city, amplified the tweets of a British far-right racist group, denounced as fake news robust science evidence warning of the dangers of climate change, and is now trying to interfere shamelessly in the Conservative Party leadership race by backing Boris Johnson because he believes it would enable him to gain an ally on number 10 for his divisive agenda. And then he points out, by the way, this is not just something happening in the United States. He says Donald Trump is just one of the most egregious examples of a growing global threat, the far right. It's on the rise around the world, threatening our hard-won rights and freedoms and the values that have defined our liberal democratic societies for more than 70 years. He points out Orban in Hungary, Salvini in Italy, Le Pen in France, Farage in the UK. These are basically fascist movements. So to Egberto Willi's question, how do we avert the inevitable plutocrat-driven civil war?